Um, this is pretty straightforward. What probably the pointing or the change was, if you've heard this or someone told you about the presentation before, is the last 3 slides are going to be put up on the political science department, and I'll send you the data so they put it up on the legal studies website. What it does is show what the success rate is in getting into the most popular law school for our students or applicants, and how successful UCF students were for the fall of 2011, 2012. Ones are now underway. To tell us very briefly about the process. This is the easy part. I strongly urge and push people to take the June LSAT for a lot of reasons. One of them is it allows you to study after the first test. If you have to retake it, you have July and August, and most are in September actually, to study. It also gives you, if you have a good score, a chance to think without any pressure about where you think you want to try and go, and then start the process of preparation, things like that. For people who take the test in October, it gets a little more crunched in a sense, because you won't get your decision until November, right around the 1st of November. Then you have to make an immediate decision if you have to retake the December test and all the other things. But normally people now, starting in late September, mid-September onward, October, November, should be completing their applications and doing personal statements, letter recommendations. We'll go back to some of that. All that is sent to the law school admission council. That's what LSAC refers to. December, January, you send your applications in most cases. You follow through to make letters that are in, make sure your transcripts are done. Now, transcripts are important, and they want originals from every college you attend, not just UCF. Because UCF doesn't necessarily accept all the courses you took. So what they want is as complete a record as they can get. And then you wait. By the end of March, you start getting acceptances or rejections, or you start getting wait notices. We'll talk a little bit about that. The notifications come. You usually are given a period of time to respond, because what they usually ask for is a deposit. Before you do that, I always tell people, visit the law school. I don't care if it's Gainesville, and you know they play football, so obviously there's no question. And they're cheap. The reason why I say that is when you go up there, you're going to be living there for 3 years. Now, for you, that may be wonderful. If you're taking a family with you or a loved one, that may not be so wonderful. Because Gainesville's a nice place to live and all the other stuff, but it is out in the sticks. So jobs are very competitive. You have people working 7-Elevens with master's degrees because they need the money. And so the job market is very different there. So if you have someone who's just college, loved one who graduates with you, that person wants to go on and use their career, they're not going to be able to in most cases. And so people have to make choices where they may not go to Gainesville. I've had several do that. I've had others where they had to leave the family here and they commuted, but that's very difficult. Law school isn't set up to be very easily in terms of commuting. The reason is because law schools don't give you the chance to do what a lot of you do here. As I walk in and a couple students say, well, I don't have to class on Friday. You know, I set my schedule up so whatever. Law school gives you your schedule and says be there, and they take attendance. And so you may be scheduled for a class at 7:30 in the morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Why? That professor likes to get up early and teach me and go on to other things in the day. And you're not, that you can't say, oh, let me go to drop ad to fix this. No, you're in a group. When you're recruited into law school, you usually come in with a class of people. Those are the people that are going to become your peers, the ones you're going to interact with. This is when we talk about how alumni are very important. These are your alumni future. And so this is often the most personal things you get there. In May to the fall, you complete your financial arrangements. We'll talk about that. That usually refers to taking loans for most people. There's very few scholarships, and we'll talk about how those are given out when we get there. Law school admission. The 3 things that they look for. Grade point average, pretty straightforward. LSAT test score, that ranges from 120 to 180. We'll see that other. The other is what can make the difference. And we'll talk about that. Personal statement, letters of reference, a variety of other things that might be in the file. Some of them they ask for, some of them you can send. So it's up to the individual how they work that out. Talk about grades. Grades are pretty straightforward. If you're below a 2.5, very unlikely you're going to get in. Now why is that? It's because they don't think you might not change your life and suddenly decide to study. I mean, they always get students to say, oh, when I go to law school, this is the first day of my real life. This is real school. They say, you've got 16 years of activity. You have a record. And it's hard to get away from that record. So what happens is, they're probably not likely to be impressed with your GPA. Unless there's been something horrendous happen, or there's been a significant gap in time. It doesn't mean you dropped out for a semester, but you may have been out for 10 years. There's older students who have not such good GPAs. Those don't get thrown out. Law schools don't throw out anything. They just may not count it as heavily. And this is why they want original transcripts. You went to community college and you transferred to UCF. UCF maybe didn't accept all your courses because you got an F in one. We don't normally accept failing courses. And so what happens is that doesn't appear, but the law school wants to know your record. And if you get tricky with them, you're just going to kill your application, or you may kill your career, because that would be dishonesty. And if you're dishonest before you even get into law school, it don't get any better if you get to move forward. 2.5, 2.9, we get a lot of people in here. There's a lot of you that went to college, and it was, I should put it a polite way, the first time you were away from your parents, especially your mother, whose parents' duty in life was to come down the hall and kick your butt out of bed until you go to school. Now your mother's somewhere else. I don't care if she's a helicopter parent or not. She's not there to make sure you get up and go somewhere. Unless she GPS tracking is that good that she can tell whether you're in your room or you're somewhere else where you should be. So we have students who blow the first year. You know, Barville, sex, drugs, rock and roll. And so what happens is they're building their GPA. It may be a long, hard push. And you know, when I talk to students who've had that issue, we talk about what they need to do. You had a bad semester. Now sometimes people have bad semesters because something happens. Their family has an illness. Family loses their house. Family is now destitute. That's stress on the student, even though the student may be on loan somewhere. But there. 3.0 to 3.3, you're marginally competitive. Now this is where you start talking about having a good chance of getting in. It doesn't guarantee that you will get in, but it gives you a chance. If you're below a 3.0, it makes it harder for you. 3.3, 3.6 is competitive other factors. It depends where you're applying for. If you get over 3.5, you move yourself into different categories in terms of possible acceptance or not. But they are conscious that people, and they do get your transcript with the courses listed. And if you have this miraculous rise from 2.1 to suddenly I'm only getting 4 O's, they're going to look real hard at that. Not because you didn't do it, but what are you taking? You know, this is why the LSAT wouldn't necessarily compute your GPA, because they don't compute course grades that come from phys ed or other kinds of areas. So 3.3, 3.6, you're going to be competitive, assuming your LSAT score is reasonable. 3.74, you're competitive. I keep saying here other factors. You know, there may be things about you that are not going to make you entirely as competitive as your grade supposedly would make it. The other factor is your LSAT score. LSAT scores are difficult. If you're below 140, I'll be honest, you're not going to make it. And if you go to a law school, it'll take you, unless you just have some terrible problem that forces you not to be able to do it. A law school can't do it. Here's why. Law school, these stupid U.S. News and World Report rankings, the most heavily weighted thing in that ranking is LSAT score. And so you get the situation where people who score real low are bringing down that school's score in terms of competitiveness. You know, all of you talk very knowledgeably about, oh, this is a first or a second or a third tier school, fourth, fifth. This is a big factor. So what happens is a lot of schools will draw lines. Below 145 is considered problematic by many schools. Doesn't mean you can't get in, but you got to have something that makes us know that you can do it. I've had students get in and go to really good law schools with a LSAT score that low, but they had a record of performance. They didn't have a bad first semester. They had other things that were in their file that made them competitive. It's up to the individual, you know, to decide. You know, you can go ahead and apply, but you got to start being realistic. This is why sometimes I tell them, you got to retake the test. You know, if you get another 140, that's your score. But if you can get better over 150, that's important to be able to do it and to work at doing it. 150 to 159. You're going to be able to get into some reasonably good law schools at that score. The higher up you are in the 150s, I usually would suggest to students, if you want to go to Florida State, you got to be 155, 56 and up. There's a few that come in lower than that, but that seems to be the drop point where people don't make it. Their GPAs are good, but that. The 160 to 169, it's automatic, but not where you necessarily want to go. If you want to go to Harvard, it won't make it, unless you're at the 170 end. So what happens at this end is you start getting into, you know, where do you want to go questions. I mean, the average at a school like Yale is about 173. Harvard's a little lower, about 171, but Harvard is twice as big. So they have a bigger class. They take more chances by their standards of accepting applicants. 170, 180, automatic, but not necessarily where you want to be. People get, and you'll see this there's a book, the book that they sell. It's the LSAC ABA book. If you go on the website, they'll sell you a copy of it. It's got all the schools, it's got their descriptions of them, it's also got scores. And you can look at the thing, and there's a number of schools you'll find. You'll find someone who has a 180 in his 175, 180 category, he couldn't get in. Why? Because you don't know the rest of his file. You don't know that this person may have gotten letters that basically are such that you'd only take this guy if you've got a lot of police officers around, because he's a problem. Or this individual, just like the guy out who in Denver did the shooting. There was one professor in one of the departments where a school he applied to says, under no conditions should you take this person. This is before he did all that. The guy creeped him out. But the point is, this is the LSAT, and this is where it is. If you want to think about the LSAT a little differently, LSAT score runs from 120 to 180. Take off the 1, 20 to 80. If you add on a digit, 200, 800. Until a few years ago, the LSAT was a 200, 800, just like the SAT. The reason they stopped it was because law schools were deciding whether to accept someone because one person has a 605 and this other person has a 600. The 605 is obviously better. That's error. That's an error term in the test. One mismarked thing and you dropped out. And so they consider your score to be a fluctuation. You got your scores here, it fluctuates 10, 20 points in either direction, usually 10 points. If you go over 10 points, that's great. But we've had a number of people who got 160s and 159s who turned them into 140s. That's why if you get a good score, be really careful. Don't have this little thing in your head saying, oh, I know how to take the test. I'll obviously do better next time. No, probably not. Statistically, you got a 50% chance of going up or going down. And so if you take that chance, you can hurt yourself. It's not as damaging as it used to be. They no longer average scores, LSAT, but you've got to explain why you retook the test. They're looking at you saying, what an idiot. You know, I'm not sure I want him to be my lawyer. In the February 2012 test, we had 252 test takers. These are UCF students. 27 either canceled or didn't show. Didn't do that. 123 retook the test, some of them several times prior. 66% LCD up, usually 1 to 3 points, few higher. 29% LSAT down, same range of decline. 6% LSAT score remained basically exactly where it was, didn't move. Questions I always ask students, if you want to retake, did you study for the test conditions, test environment, what was your health? You know, people take tests in December, often have the flu, get cold. But you're not like the one that we had a June test about 12 years ago now, where a student was in the test with these people. They had to go to South Florida. So they were over in South Florida, and they were right beside the daycare. So air conditioning broke, so they opened the windows. This is Florida in June. So they're frying, and these little kids are running around, they woo, all that, and then a fire alarm went off in the building next to them. So the fire trucks come. It was a nightmare. The LSAT eventually allowed him to retake the test for free, but the student I was dealing with, it did him no good, because he was going to be gone in the fall semester overseas and was not going to be able to take the test.